Welcome to another edition of Subspace Brief Facts. Today we'll be taking a look at Sega's Fatal Labyrinth, one of the first roguelikes ever released for a home video game console. Released to North American audiences in 1991, Fatal Labyrinth puts players in the shoes of a voiceless, nameless protagonist on a quest to retrieve a holy goblet from an evil red dragon that sits atop a 30-story castle. The plot really isn't important here, though. Fatal Labyrinth is about one thing and one thing only: exploring randomized dungeons. Aside from a few lines of dialogue that introduce and close out the game, there's really no narrative to speak of at all. As a roguelike, Fatal Labyrinth is primarily comprised of procedurally generated random levels. Each floor of the dragon's castle will be different on every playthrough of the game. Additionally, the properties of special items will be randomized as well. You'll find multicolored potions, canes, and rings in each game you play, but what they do will change every time. In one playthrough, a purple ring might allow you to cast a powerful blizzard spell. In another game, it might cause you to go blind. In other words, it's a very primitive roguelike. Everything's different every time you play. It's not as complicated as modern examples of the genre, like say, Diablo or Torchlight, but it's a nice first shot for Sega, and a great introduction to the genre for console fans. While it's not as complex as other roguelikes, Fatal Labyrinth has a great pick-up-and-play appeal. It's probably about as complex as your average console gamer could have handled in 1991, particularly considering the constraints of the Genesis's 3-button controller. That isn't to say Fatal Labyrinth isn't without its own unique idiosyncrasies. For one, Fatal Labyrinth's dungeons are littered with gold. Despite this, there's positively nowhere you can spend it. No shops to find, no guards to bribe. The only time gold actually comes into play is when you die. You see, all gold does is buy you a better funeral service when you die. The more money you have, the more well-wishers show up at your funeral, presumably to hear your will being read. It's actually pretty depressing, at least by 1991 console game standards. Additionally, like many roguelikes, Fatal Labyrinth features a hunger mechanic. Food is directly tied to your ability to regain health. If you've got a full belly, you'll keep regenerating that health. If you're out of food, you'll slowly lose health. That in and of itself isn't particularly unique or interesting, but you see, Fatal Labyrinth also features what you could call an obesity mechanic as well. If you eat too much, you'll begin to slow down. And if you totally gorge yourself, you'll actually die. Fatal Labyrinth may be one of the few games that actually permits you to eat yourself to death. So I guess the real lesson here is, if you're going to eat too much, make sure you have a lot of cash on hand. By now you've probably noticed that Fatal Labyrinth really isn't much to look at. Its visuals will probably look more at home on a Sega Master System or a NES. But there's actually a pretty good reason for this. You see, Fatal Labyrinth is actually one of the first downloadable games released for a home video game console. While most of the world received Fatal Labyrinth as a standard retail cartridge release, Japanese audiences originally received it as a game that could be downloaded via Sega's MegaNet service, which you could probably consider a forebearer of the Sega Channel, which we received in North America in about 1994. Fatal Labyrinth had to be simple, and it had to be small, so it could be swiftly downloaded using a primitive dial-up modem. As a cartridge release, this probably wasn't very striking, but if this magically showed up on your video game console via the magic of the internet in 1991, you'd probably be flat out floored by it. So try to consider that if you're going to give Fatal Labyrinth a shot. If anything, Fatal Labyrinth stands as a testament to Sega's legacy of bringing new concepts and ideas to the home console market. As a console roguelike and a downloadable game, Fatal Labyrinth is kind of a pioneer 2 times over. On top of that, its fundamental mechanics are sound, and you can play through it in about 2 to 3 hours. Also, you can pick it up for the relatively low price on Steam of about $2.99 if you were so inclined. Give it a shot. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Until next time, this is Steve White for Subspace Briefcase, signing off.